New White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre found herself in the hot seat yesterday when facing questions from Fox News' Peter Doocy on inflation. Let's watch.
The president's Twitter account posted the other day, "You want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share." How does raising taxes on corporations reduce inflation?
Are you talking about a specific tweet?
He tweeted, "You want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share."
Look, we have talked about this past year about making sure that the wealthiest among us are paying their fair share. And that is important to do, and that is something that the president has been working on every day when we talk about inflation and lowering costs. And so it's very important that as we're seeing costs rise, as we're talking about how to build a America that's safe, that's equal for everyone and doesn't leave everyone behind, that is an important part of that as well.
New Pew Research polling shows that inflation is still Americans' top concern, with no other issue even coming close. It makes sense then that President Biden's approval rating continues to falter. NBC News polling shows it now dipping to 39%. That same survey also found that a sobering 75% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Yikes.
Here with their reaction is our rising panel. Jordan Chariton is a journalist and CEO of Status Quo News, and Philip Wegmann is a White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, Philip, I don't know if you were in the room. How do you think Jean-Pierre is doing in this new role? I thought she had a couple rough answers compared to Psaki, but I can't remember. Maybe Psaki was a little rough at her start too.
So I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I heard Peter's question, I didn't really look up or pay attention because I thought this is a softball. This is going to be a easy question to answer because we know how Jen Psaki would have replied. We know how Brian Deese would have fielded that question. In all likelihood, they would have said something succinct about how you want a higher tax rate for some of these corporations because that creates a more equitable economy and that allows more people the opportunity to get ahead and have a fair shot. And that's the way that you combat inflation. Or maybe they would have taken it a step farther and said you want a higher tax rate on these corporations because that would necessarily tamp down demand, and that's the way to fight inflation. But instead, we didn't get that. And if you listen to the entire answer and the entire back and forth, you saw Karine talk about climate change, the importance of collective bargaining, the marginal tax rates for cops, but she didn't really close the loop and make a cohesive answer. Now, is this going to sink her or define her tenure? No, not at all. Psaki had some rough goes early on as well, but the Biden administration says that tackling inflation is their number one priority, and you would expect a cohesive and succinct answer about why the Biden administration thinks that hiking these tax rates on corporations is the right way to go. We didn't get that yesterday.
Jordan, you spend more time than most talking to voters one-on-one. What kind of message on inflation do you think would actually be effective?
Yeah, we've been hearing about corporations paying their fair share since we were all born. So I don't really think that's necessarily going to excite people right now. I think a message of, these companies are making record profits every quarter. So maybe we need to start taking away their subsidies and taking the savings and giving it to American citizens through checks to get them through these tough times of inflation, particularly the oil companies that are making record profits, but somehow have, $4.50 in California, $6-7 a gallon. Maybe they don't need the subsidies at this point since they're making such profits. I really think that kind of messaging could help, as well as direct relief to Americans. They did it during COVID. I don't see why they wouldn't when you have $7 gas and obviously groceries and other things very, very high.
Philip, what do you say about that? Because I have seen some efforts from Democrats in California, for instance, to offer some relief, gas relief, things like that. And there's been some pushback from some conservative politicians that sort of thing is a giveaway, that Democrats are trying to buy votes. What is the relationship there between what folks obviously need, which is some economic support in a time of high inflation and all kinds of crises ranging from, gas limitations to baby formula limitations. And the Republican line, which seems to be from some quarters at least, that supporting voters in that way is somehow a handout that folks shouldn't appreciate.
Right, and I think Republicans would say, well, we're in a very different spot than we were during the earlier days of the pandemic. Now that relief check that was supposed to get everyone through a lockdown would be an impediment to returning to work and getting the economy humming. That's what a Republican would likely say. But on the question of these oil companies, I think that the Biden administration, they're in a tough spot here, right? Because they do want to point out that these corporations are making record profits. They do want to point out that some of the federal land leases that they have, that those corporations aren't making the most with them. And yet at the same time, because gas is so much higher, they are in a spot where they're sort of like trying to encourage them to produce more in the moment, while also saying to their base, look, we're totally going to transition from fossil fuels later on once we're through the Putin price hike. But for now, drill baby drill, and maybe things will be different later. I think that the prudential question of what is happening in the exact moment when you have gas that is ticking up above $4. That makes a lot of these sort of ideological questions of, what are we going to do permanently long term? That makes those different to have conversations about that. And I think that, there are moments where the administration is willing to say, well, let's tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But are they willing to go, a step farther in terms of direct relief and cut checks again? No, not at this point, I don't think.
Well, here's some more bad news for Democrats. New NBC polling measured the public's opinion on 9 different political figures and institutions, including Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the Supreme Court, and Vladimir Zelensky. The most unpopular in terms of net favorables was the Democratic Party.
I should have put Nickelback in there just to see. Just to see. I think that's really bad news for the Democratic Party, obviously. Jordan, what do you make of that? I think, so my sense is that Americans just do not feel like the administration, Biden, and thus the Democratic Party, are taking inflation seriously enough. I think they were late to the party about the baby formula shortage is now a huge deal, absolutely affecting working families. And Jen Psaki, I think, fielded that question last week and was like, oh yeah, we're doing something about it. Well, what? And there's so much attention to Ukraine, or Ukraine's going to get billions because they need that. Okay, fine, but what about how much more suffering can people actually stand here? The party doesn't seem like it's paying attention or like it has a plan.
Yeah, I think this underscores, and Brianna certainly knows, the media kind of sold that Joe Biden was the most electable, but in reality, if you look at exit polls from 2020, people didn't really vote out of love for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. They voted to remove Donald Trump. And pretty early on, beyond just inflation, President Biden kind of abandoned some of his baseline promises, from a $15 minimum wage, just unilaterally removing that from major bills. You don't hear about a public option, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, inflation right now is a major thing. But when even your campaign promises, the top one, which was a $15 minimum wage, that was out the door right early on. It really gives voters a focus on the Democratic Party, elitism, out of touchness, rather than delivering. Say what you want about Trump, he followed through on his promises, whereas Biden, sure, you could say 50-50 Senate, but he didn't really even fight for those major things. So that makes, when you couple that with the inflation now, which there's not a ton Biden can do, the numbers make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does seem like the flip side of him trying to exculpate himself by saying, hey, it's not my fault that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are holding everything up, is that he's also saying to voters, there's nothing I can do. I'm inept. If you vote for me again, there's going to be more of the same thing. So while you have some folks that are beating the vote for more Democrats drum, they've also really put the message out there in a way that's destructive to their own interests, that Democrats are ineffectual. They know they're ineffectual. Unlike Donald Trump, Joe Biden very early on was explicit about his unwillingness to use executive orders in the way that Donald Trump had done. So student debt cancellation being this huge issue and this popular issue that could directly affect the lives of 44 million Americans, 44 million potential voters, is treated as like a kind of silly, bête noire that's stalking the Democratic Party instead of a real political opportunity. Philip, what do you think about this?
I think you nailed it on the head right there, because you have this unwillingness to pick up the pen and the phone in the same way that President Obama did in some of these areas. Obviously, I know progressives were not completely thrilled with everything he did, but there's a hesitancy by President Biden to do that. And then there's a realization, he said the other day, yeah, I know why voters are blaming me for inflation, because we control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And then he had to immediately correct himself and say, well, we don't totally control the Senate. I don't have control over all of those votes. He's a bit hamstrung there. I think that this leads to an interesting question for what comes next. What happens when we wake up in 2023 and perhaps one or both chambers are controlled by Republicans? What does Biden then do? Do you see him lean into executive action? Does he flex those muscles, which is going to lead to a backlash and maybe a lack of a working relationship with whoever, with whatever Republicans want to do in Congress, or does he sort of moderate, and does he look for areas where he can sort of compromise with Republicans? Thus far, I don't think we have a good answer on that. What we've heard, whether it's from Build Back Better or to trying to codify Roe, is a sort of woe is me message from this administration, where they say, well, if only we had a supermajority in the Senate, we could actually do what we promised you on the campaign trail.
Well, gotta leave it there. Philip, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.